Our country has gone through a lot in terms of natural disasters. Looking back today, we will see that we have always survived every terrible catastrophe. There have been times when the outside world was wrong in its assumption or prediction.
It was the tail end of 2004 when a tsunami attacked the Andaman coast of southern Thailand. Everybody who was present when it hit was stunned, as this had never happened before. The beach that had previously been known for its beauty was overwhelmed by the lingering scent and sight of instantaneous death. The ensuing saga of human sorrow was in fact a composite of wailing on the part of the ones left behind and their desperate crying for the missing ones. Just as the society and the entire IT system was still in great shock following the tragedy, a group of men and women in blue uniforms forged onwards amidst the sea of debris, rescuing, handing out items of basic needs that had been acquired through His Majesty's personal funds to ease sufferings on the part of those who survived the wrathful forces of nature. In hard times, the strangers were the embodiment of their remaining hope, their fellow countrymen.
The City Hall was very crowded with tsunami survivors. So we set up a relief station right there and started our mission to help those in need and solve the problems they were facing. The people living nearby saw our activities and told us about the group who had fled up the hill and would not come down for help as they were still frightened. So we went up there to meet them.
The logo on the team's shirt indicated that the first group of rescuers to arrive on site was from Rajaprachar Nuglor Foundation, which was founded following His Majesty's initiation in 1963. The word Rajaprachar Nuglor has its roots in Anuglor, which means assistance or support. Thus, Rajaprachar Nuglor means the king and the people are one in the relief effort. Or it can also mean the people giving mutual support and assistance.
It is in line with His Majesty's policy to let everyone have a part in merit making. It is lucky for Thailand because so many people are willing to volunteer their support and help. I can't praise their spirit enough, aside from relieving the distress of the living casualties. We also look after the surviving family members so that they can lead a normal life.
Having more than 40 years of experience and familiarity with His Majesty's policy and profound understanding of the series of problems related to mass disasters, the team strove to find solutions on both short and long-term basis. With collaboration from the Armed Forces, Development Command and the Engineering Department, the Royal Thai Army, Rajaprachar Nuglor Foundation was able to build Rajaprachar Nuglor schools in the 4 southern provinces on the Andaman coast for children who were affected by the tsunami attack. The schools were constructed in a little more than a year.
The 4 schools were meant for orphans whose parents had either perished in the tsunami attack or become destitute after the tragic incident. We provide these orphans with food, lodging, as well as education.
I was gratified that they came to help us Southerners. All the children in Taptawan went to the school.
I am sure this is the only place in Thailand. It is the largest school in the south.
This This foundation of interrelationship and interdependence between the king and his subjects was established in the aftermath of a deadly storm, yet another instance of nature's infliction of pain and suffering. In 1962, Typhoon Harriet struck southern Thailand. The disaster itself took only a short while, but left behind appalling mass destruction and wreckage in 12 coastal provinces, particularly at Cape Talumpuk, Pak Penang District, Nakhon Si Thammarat Province, where more than 1,000 people either lost their lives or were missing.
Actually, it was as if people had been forewarned of what was coming. My mother told me that by late afternoon, toward evening, winds kept blowing and the sky was unusually red. We saw something like bright light over in the sea. Before the storm hit, the sea ran dry. It had been raining all day. The winds came up strong at night. My mother said she had her right arm around Grandma and her left arm around me. She could not forsake any of us. So that was how the three of us fought our way through rain and wind to my uncle's house.
Hundreds of kilometres away was where Chitladao Villa is located. The distress of his subjects could not evade His Majesty's attention. He moved into action by enlisting the Department of Public Welfare for emergency disaster relief. However, the typhoon had destroyed all local means of communications. His Majesty was then compelled to enlist the Royal Thai Air Force for immediate relief effort, enabling Cape Talumpuk to become accessible by air on the following morning.
Relief cargo was shipped via Royal Thai Air Force transport aircraft with wide loading door, cargo rescue ship and trucks, etc. Through such joint effort, relief arrived in no time at all.
In the meantime, His Majesty instructed that his private radio broadcasting station, Radio Osor, conduct a campaign whereby an appeal went out to the public for donations of cash and kind. Within 1 month, donations worth 16 million baht flowed into the King's residence as a gesture of public participation in the King's Benevolence Act to relieve the distress of their fellow countrymen.
The donated items had to be carried from the gate and set up in piles on the floor at the radio station. When these accumulated, and entrusted them all to the Director General of the Department of Public Welfare, who in turn took the responsibility of distributing them to the needy and the distressed in the south. The mass destruction there was unbelievable. Then the rescue team came to help. We only learned later that they brought help from the King. In the face of such an enormous distress, the surviving victims' morale was so low.
By royal command, part of the money left over from the Disaster Relief Fund was spent to build a Raja Prachar New Glaw School at Ban Plai Lam. A certain amount also went to the Ministry of Education, which was entrusted with the task of building schools number 1 to 12 in 6 affected provinces in the south. Despite all those constructions, an amount of 3 million baht was left over. Therefore, His Majesty decided that a relief foundation be established, the interest of which was to primarily benefit the children who were orphaned in the tragedy of Cape Talumpuk and then be utilised as working capital for a relief foundation in anticipation of future mass disasters. The foundation was to be called Rajaprachat New Glaw Foundation. It is not that we want natural disasters of this kind to happen again, but we must learn our lessons. There is a lot to be learned from such disasters.
I was delighted, gratified. All miseries just disappeared. After that, they all recognized that we were there on royal mission. They were simply overjoyed. Some made obeisance to the items that we handed out. I wish you could have seen the expression on their faces. They regarded the items as a gift from the king. They smiled with tears in their eyes, you know?
The constant inflow of donated funds, coupled with the extended scope of work, Rajapracha Nugroho Foundation all testify to the virtue of unity and the intrinsic value of interrelationship between the monarch and his subjects, as well as interdependence among the populace itself, which has been reflected in His Majesty's initiations and policies. A significant aspect of sustained mutual dependence among the populace was emphasised in His Majesty's speech on the 30th of October 1965. Here's an excerpt thereof. The bigger size of fund, the better. Donors should first have a clear idea of the Foundation's raison d'etre, i.e., its justification of existence, that its achievements are worthy of the donor's contribution. They should not donate with only the intention to be a part of the King's charitable ventures.
Like the Princess Mother, His Majesty always reviews the factors involved in a donation. You see, there have been cases where someone requested an audience to present a donor to him, thereby expecting to gain a special recognition or favour. Some of them have personal interest to guard. His Majesty underscores sincerity and straightforwardness, which is why he has to do a whole lot of scrutinising. He does not simply accept donations without asking questions. I said I was clearing the woods. He asked me why I came out then. Well, the king was coming. I just had to appear. To be in attendance, hadn't I? Of course, I did so love the king then. And still do.
It was not long after Thailand emerged from the massive natural disaster that the return of the crisis hit the country. The communist insurgency movement, which had long been secretly active, began to gradually advance with the aim to intellectually influence Thai population. Communism was originated in the West. Its goal was to eradicate poverty, which arose as a result of the Industrial Revolution. Socialism and communism believed ownership or right was at the core of social inequality. These two doctrines were in direct contradiction to capitalism. And that was the starting point for the war that lingered on for centuries between the two great powers, both representing conflicting ideological extremes. Communism seemed to have penetrated the Thai way of thinking since 1922 and gradually intensified with time. The situation came to a climax in 1965 when whispers on the part of the believers were superseded by the noise of artillery fire in Nagar district, Nakhon Phanom province. It was the first clash of arms between the government and the Communist Party of Thailand. Victims of circumstances and caught between the heavy fighting and infiltrations from both sides, the local people had little option. One villager after another participated in the training session organised by the Communist Party. Admittedly, some later became active party members. However, they were outnumbered by those who complied out of necessity.
We just went along, hearing but not listening. Sometimes the training session lasted 7 days. We put up no resistance, no contradiction, just pretended to listen for our own survival. We had to socialize with them, like offering them water to drink, but nothing further. We could not say, no, we can't give you water because you are a communist. It would not do. One needed to be clear on this point. Being generous does not necessarily mean being a convert. We were just not interested. Communism gained victory in every neighbouring country of Thailand, except Malaysia. Based on the Western domino effect, political analysts predicted that the same would be imminent for our country also. Thus, It was during this period that a considerable number of wealthy Thais were getting ready to seek asylum in a third country.
No one could be sure that what went on in the mind of His Majesty in his status as head of state, but it was evident to one and all that soldiers, border patrol policemen and villagers living in areas where communist insurgency was threatening became the target of his visits.
Before leaving to take up positions during Vietnam War, the Thai soldiers in the frontline troops were given commemorative coins bearing His Majesty's image on the front and the royal monogram on the back. Those coins belonged to the lot under the logo, "We Shall Fight." It was designed only for the Jong Ang Suk troops.
Despite the fact that they were living in fright amidst threatening violence, a slender light of hope kept flickering on within the hearts of people in border areas. By 1974, more and more villagers fled from different directions to settle down in Ban Non Din Dang. 3 years later, the overcrowding in the community became very serious. In the meantime, local communist insurgency activities also got more and more violent, as Ban Non Din Dang was situated right at the Thai-Cambodian border, one of the key assembly points of the Communist Party of Thailand.
When news of the troubles reached His Majesty's attention, he summoned a meeting with the Director General of the Royal Irrigation Department, whereby His Majesty outlined to him the Lang Nam Rong Basin Development Scheme for urgent implementation. With serious insurgency problems going on in the area, what then could be the reason for urgent development of the river basin? On the surface, the two matters did not seem to have anything in common.
As a consequence of that audience, accelerated construction work for Klong Manao Reservoir, Lam Nang Rong Dam and Lam Patia Reservoir got underway within the following year at the locations His Majesty had specified.
He pointed out exactly where things should be to achieve the desired water level, etc. They were all there in the royal map, with a scale of 1 to 50,000. It was just amazing. Around 1977 to 79, the construction work had to be protected by soldiers. For example, one could see military bunkers in the background at the site. Even guest houses had once been bunkers. They had renovated and turned them into residence.
With no application of weapon or violence, the enemy line was gradually pushed backwards, just as the water level in the dam kept rising. Shelling was heard at longer intervals. At the same time, villages at the border became less accessible as the water level was higher.
I had no idea who chose the site of the dam, but as time passed, I came to be convinced that it was just the right spot. Why? Because the area under the water had in fact been their assembly point. It had been the venue of our 7-day session too. The spot I mentioned, it used to be their strategic point because its location on the borderline facilitated their comings and goings between Cambodia and Thailand. Once a huge expanse of land, it now became much smaller with a large body of water occupying the rest. It was absolutely impossible for them to swim across. The only option left was to walk along the shore, and that was where they were waylaid by the authority. I have always wanted to commend whoever. How did the person ever think out this plan? Building here and closing there.
Lam Nang Rong Reservoir, which was built upon His Majesty's initiation, used to play a significant role in the context of national security in the past. But in time of peace, the reservoir continues to nurture cultivation and urban life in part of Non Din Dang sub-district or Buriram province.
You cannot shoot at the doctrine itself, but you hit someone when you shoot, and if one gets shot, 2 more will appear. If 2 get shot, 4 more will appear. With anger or resentment, quick decisions are made, say, to join the other side, even though they may never believe in the doctrine.
But it was the King of Thailand's perspiration and great compassion that saved the country, a tiny one in the global context. It was a victory gained through the royal concept and deep perception that he was not fighting against communists but against poverty.
I once brought up the subject with His Majesty as to why the domino effect did not spread to our country. That was about 20 years ago in Narathiwat province. His Majesty simply explained that, contrary to foreign predictions, the domino effect could not proceed because we Thais still believed in the virtue of mutual giving. I can say I'm a fervent advocate of this philosophy, as I used to live in many countries that were hit by the domino effect. Nobody gave. In times of crisis, everybody aimed to take without giving. Everybody had the one and only goal, to take and get out as fast as possible. In the end, we survived because of what His Majesty called development strategy, whereby no weaponry was needed. Instead, we gave, just as His Majesty said.
In the first 3 decades of the reign, the country was constantly faced with political and national security problems. His Majesty's strenuous work during those long years was for the good of a multitude of his poverty-stricken subjects, while soldiers and border police in deployment all needed moral support.
In the battlefield, we made sure we had the King's image on us. In our hearts, we had the Lord Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and the King. So we were reminded of our duty to fight for our country at all times.
It was late afternoon when His Majesty completed his round of visits to soldiers, policemen, and volunteer civilians on duty in the Red Zone in Tung Chang District, Nan Province. His Majesty had just started his lunch when a report came on the field radio from Hue Groen about a clash with terrorists, whereby some policemen had been critically injured. His Majesty, in his capacity as Thailand's Commander-in-Chief of the Royal Armed Forces, boarded the royal helicopter, which took off to the pilot's reluctance, ignoring the red signal flare, and landed close to the crash site. All lives at the troubled base had been saved. Even the soldier who had been shot in the chest is still alive today.
It happened right at this spot. All of us had been thinking the moment had come for us to sacrifice our lives for the country and the throne. At least most of us were. In those days, we all thought along this line.
Military personnel rendered their services to ensure national security, but when some of them were maimed or injured in action and had to be dismissed from duty, they never escaped His Majesty's attention. His repeated remark was, they bravely gave up physical pleasures, even their life and blood, for our sake. We must do everything in our power to help them.
It was our duty, since we volunteered our service. The command was to be obeyed, be it to charge or even to die. No invader was to take even a tiny piece of our land. Every inch must be reclaimed. We acted out of patriotism. I do not know about others, but I can speak for our group. We gave our all for the country, for the King.
An array of assistance was extended to them. Some became patients under royal sponsorship. In the case of death, the families of the deceased received financial assistance. On the similar token, Saijai Thai Foundation, artificial limb and vocational workshop under the royal sponsorship all came into being in recognition of the war veterans' sacrificial deeds, and also in keeping with His Majesty's self-reliance approach as regards the war veterans' future.
It was far-sightedness on His Majesty's part to have foreseen that the disabled needed a secure future and care. They are provided with vocational training, looked after and treated mentally and physically, prepared to cope with the outside world and able to earn a living for their families.
The clinking sound of carvers' tools hitting each other has now superseded that of heavy shelling in battlegrounds. The hands that might have taken the enemy's lives are the same ones that have now instilled life into the handicraft. Physical disability has become more or less bearable in the face of these beautiful creations, a guarantee for their future livelihood. For these one-time combatants, the light of hope in a new life is shining brightly.
My spirit is high, knowing I have the royal spiritual support. I am gratified just receiving care and concern from our sovereign Lord the King, even if I can't walk like the others.
The 4th of December is one of the most important dates in Thailand, when millions of television sets are turned on for the live broadcast of His Majesty's annual address to the nation. It is the eve of His Majesty's birthday anniversary. On such an occasion, His Majesty never fails to stop for a light conversation with a group of disabled men waiting for him at the foot of the stairs leading up to the Grand Assembly Hall. They are indeed disabled war veterans whom His Majesty has never forsaken.
His Majesty usually inquires after our health. This year, he asked how I was, but in the previous years he repeatedly urged me not to stop. Do not leave your work, he had earlier said to me. I was way in the back, but it so happened that the King came round from behind and I happened to be face to face with him. He asked me how I was. I told him I was doing all right. In an interview with Dennis D. Gray, author of the article entitled Thailand's Working Royals, His Majesty the King said, and I quote, "It has been said that a kingdom resembles a pyramid, with the monarch placed at the very top of it and the people at its base. But in this country, it is a pyramid in reverse. And that is the reason why the king sometimes feels the pain around his neck and shoulders."
In October 1973, a mass of civilians and students assembled at Sanam Luang Ground, adjacent to the Grand Palace, demanding accelerated democratic reform. Demonstrations finally spread to the area in front of Chitlada Villa. During the melee that ensued, a clash erupted between demonstrators and security personnel. Seeing that the gate of the royal residence had been unlocked, some of the demonstrators fled into the palace grounds. By royal order, the palace guards had completely disarmed to avoid any untoward incident. The fleeing crowd prostrated themselves in the presence of their Lord of Life, who personally came out for an impromptu audience with his troubled subjects. In the early morning of the 14th of October, the use of force was imposed on demonstrators on an intensifying and expanding scale. However, the sound of shooting suddenly died down around 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Nobody knew why. At 6 p.m, all tanks and personnel of the armed forces retreated to their base. On Radio Thailand, Field Marshal Tenom Kittikachorn's resignation from premiership was read out to the cheering crowds on the streets, who immediately claimed their victory. Within a few days after that, government leaders left the country. Only a handful of people realized that His Majesty the King had had no sleep all through the duration of the critical times, which he termed the dark days, and that the sudden restoration of peace and quiet in the capital had arrived at royal request. By royal nomination, Professor Sanya Thammasat became interim Prime Minister. It was under Professor Sagna's leadership that was generally acknowledged as one of the most democratic constitutions was drafted. At the completion of the task, he asked for royal permission to resign so that common elections could get underway. But the country continued to experience the political ups and downs of democracy. All through those years, His Majesty delivered successive addresses and comments on various occasions and to different groups of people, whereby the importance of unity was underscored. It is unity that has upheld our national independence and sovereignty until today. To be in concordance does not mean one has to echo what others say, because by uniformity, life will become meaningless. Every one of us needs to be different when we are working as a team. Harmony is the rule of thumb. You can be in dispute with maintained harmony. Otherwise, everything will collapse.
At times, we Thais are aware of unity as a virtue. But without the unifying effect that His Majesty has, we lose our senses. His Majesty always emphasizes consciousness as well as the intellect, but at times our action is lacking in both.
The royal effort to instill in his subjects the virtuousness of both sati and unity unfortunately fell on deaf ears. Worse still, they also failed to learn from past mistakes. Thus, by the law of universal causation, it was not too long before history repeats itself. May 1992 saw large demonstrations taking place at Sanam Luang. There were demands for political reform as well as the Prime Minister's resignation. In the end, peaceful demonstrations turned violent. Once more, Thai people turned on each other. Unity was lost in the face of inability to think or act sensibly, and the blind drive to win no matter what happened. When the situation reached a critical point, the crowd once again turned to His Majesty for advice and guidance. And once again, peace was miraculously and abruptly restored. After the special live broadcast of His Majesty's meeting with two opposing leaders drew to a close, the demonstrators dispersed while soldiers returned to their barracks. The Prime Minister later resigned.
He complied. You see, every soldier devotes himself heart and soul to His Majesty the King, the Commander-in-Chief to all Thai soldiers. This is the very point I wish to remind all soldiers who take an oath of loyalty in His Majesty's presence on the 3rd of December, that they must bear in mind at all times the fact that they are His Majesty's soldiers to the day they die. They must never forget this. His Majesty ascended to the throne at the time when the country was in dire need for him. Without him, we would not have survived. From the point of view of a senior person like me, I would say we have done considerably well as a nation because His Majesty is the Lord of life, our soul, our guiding light. Thailand's political history has gone through many upheavals. Nevertheless, His Majesty's clear perception of his constitutional rights and duties has won him great respect from all sides. In the strength of all the virtues that His Majesty holds, the nation has time and again been rescued from the brink of civil war. Unfortunately, compliance to His Majesty's advice and suggestion proved only short-lived and fell into oblivion once the crisis was over. Had they been carefully listened and continuously adhered to, the country would not have had to experience a reoccurrence of similar political crisis almost 2 decades later.
His Majesty addressed the nation on the themes of unity, self-reliance and self-sufficiency for a continued period lasting more than 3 decades. Especially in 1997, the themes became more pronounced than ever, but not very many people remembered to apply His Majesty's wisdom in their daily lives. Thus, history came to repeat itself only in a different guise. victory that was claimed amidst heaps of ruins, as mentioned during His Majesty's televised audience in 1992, faded away with time, once the crisis blew over. Given fundamental deteriorations in the aspects of national unity and self-reliance, people came to give priority to extravagance and wealth, even if nobody knew how it had been acquired. As it happened, these were the factors that helped spur the country onto subsequent flops that occurred in the business, financial and industrial sectors. Left to grope about in darkness, people began once again to see and turn to their guiding light, of which His Majesty is the embodiment. Sufficiency economy, the strategy that His Majesty had initiated and laid out decades before the occurrence of a global and national financial crisis, has become instrumental in the effort to rehabilitate the country. The royal approach posed a sharp contrast as well as a significant challenge. Flanked by the two extreme economic processes are the past socialism and the present capitalism. Sufficiency economy finds its place in between those two extremes. It constitutes the middle path and the only option for future survival, on account of which present world leaders are making a review of their existing approach.
His Majesty takes into account the fact that we are living in the age where certain countries shut themselves off completely from the outside world, while some accumulate their wealth at the expense of others. How then can we exist in equilibrium? It is a tough proposition. His Majesty has to wrestle with an array of human perceptions in carrying out his vow to reign the country with righteousness for the well-being of his subjects. Thai people have led a happy life under the shelter of virtues for 6 decades. Although the worst part of the crisis seemed to be over and done with, no one should ignore lessons to be learned from past mistakes. Isn't it now time for all of us to seriously begin our lifestyle in His Majesty's footsteps, so as to stay clear of the vicious cycle caused by erratic notions on a sustained basis?